The most horrible tortures used in ancient Rome. The Roman Empire was one of the most powerful civilizations in history, known for its military prowess, architectural marvels, and advanced legal system. However, beneath this facade of civilization lay a dark and brutal world, where torture and execution were often used to instill fear, maintain order, and punish criminals, slaves, and enemies of the state. Ancient Rome developed some of the most gruesome and horrifying torture methods, often designed not only to kill, but to inflict prolonged agony and serve as a warning to others. Crucifixion, a death meant for maximum suffering. One of the most infamous tortures of ancient Rome was crucifixion, a method used primarily to execute criminals, rebellious slaves, and enemies of the state. This form of execution was designed to cause extreme suffering, both physically and psychologically. Victims were nailed or tied to a wooden cross, left to hang for hours or even days, until they succumbed to exhaustion, dehydration, and asphyxiation. The process of crucifixion was deliberately slow and excruciating. The positioning of the body placed immense strain on the arms and legs, making it nearly impossible to breathe. Victims would have to push themselves up with their legs to take a breath, only to collapse again due to fatigue. The Romans often enhanced the agony by scourging the condemned beforehand, stripping their flesh with whips embedded with metal and bone fragments. The most famous crucifixion in history is that of Jesus Christ, but thousands of others suffered the same fate, including the followers of Spartacus after their failed slave revolt. The Brazen Bull, roasting victims alive. Though originally a Greek invention, the Brazen Bull was also used by the Romans as a method of public execution. This horrific device was a hollow, life-sized bronze statue of a bull, designed with a small opening for the victim to be placed inside. Once secured, a fire was lit beneath the bull, gradually roasting the condemned alive. What made the Brazen Bull particularly cruel was its sophisticated design. Inside, a system of pipes and chambers transformed the victim's screams into sounds resembling the bellowing of a bull, creating a gruesome spectacle for onlookers. This method of execution ensured that the condemned suffered an agonizing death, while providing entertainment to the bloodthirsty Roman crowds. The rack, a slow and agonizing stretching. The Romans employed the rack as a form of interrogation and punishment, often used to extract confessions from criminals or political enemies. The rack consisted of a wooden frame with rollers at each end. The victim's wrists and ankles were tied to these rollers, which were then turned to stretch the body. As the tension increased, the joints of the victim's limbs would gradually dislocate, followed by the tearing of muscles, tendons, and ligaments. In extreme cases, the sheer force of the stretching could completely sever the limbs from the body. The pain was unimaginable, and many victims would confess to crimes they had not committed simply to end their suffering. Scapism, the most horrifying death by insect. Scapism, also known as the boats, was a rare but exceptionally cruel form of execution that the Romans are believed to have occasionally used, possibly borrowed from the Persians. The condemned was stripped naked and placed inside a hollowed-out tree trunk, or between two boats, with only their head, hands and feet exposed. They were then force-fed milk and honey, causing severe diarrhea and attracting swarms of insects. The victim would be left floating in stagnant water or under the scorching sun, while insects burrowed into their flesh and laid eggs inside their wounds. Over days or even weeks, the unfortunate soul would be slowly eaten alive, dying from infection, dehydration, and sheer agony. Scapism was not just about execution, it was about prolonging suffering to an unfathomable extent. The Tarracina, the ultimate death by impalement. Another horrifying method of Roman torture was impalement, often used against traitors and enemies. This involved driving a long sharpened stake through the victim's body, usually through the rectum or abdomen, and letting gravity pull them down slowly. The process was deliberately slow and painful, sometimes taking hours or even days for the victim to die. The executioners were skilled in placing the stake in such a way that it avoided vital organs, prolonging the suffering. The sight of impaled bodies, displayed along roadsides, served as a stark warning to anyone who dared to defy Roman rule. Damnatio ad bestias, death by wild beasts. One of the most spectacular and brutal punishments in ancient Rome was damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to the beasts. This was a common form of execution for criminals, slaves, and prisoners of war, particularly in the grand arenas, such as the Colosseum. Victims were thrown into the arena, where they faced wild animals such as lions, tigers, and bears, often without any means of defense. The sheer terror of being torn apart by wild beasts was enough to strike fear into the hearts of spectators. Sometimes, executioners would go further, tying victims to stakes, or dressing them in animal skins to provoke attacks. This form of execution was a popular public spectacle, blending brutality with entertainment in the blood-soaked world of Roman gladiatorial games. Burning at the stake, a spectacle of flames. Although burning at the stake is often associated with the Middle Ages, the Romans also used this method to execute those deemed dangerous to the state, particularly Christians in the early days of the Roman Empire. Victims were tied to wooden stakes and set on fire, either slowly roasted over a low flame or engulfed in a massive inferno. One of the most infamous instances of mass execution by fire occurred under Emperor Nero, who, according to historical accounts, used Christians as human torches to light his gardens at night. The image of people burning alive, their screams filling the air, was a testament to the merciless cruelty of Rome's judicial system. Flaying, skinning victims alive, for particularly severe offenses, the Romans employed flaying, the act of removing a person's skin while they were still alive. This form of torture was meant to inflict unbearable pain, while serving as a gruesome warning to others. Executioners would begin at the victim's extremities, peeling away the skin with sharp knives, often keeping them alive for as long as possible to prolong their agony. Flaying was reserved for traitors and those accused of grave crimes against the empire. The Romans believed that such a horrifying spectacle would deter others from committing similar offenses. Conclusion: the Roman Empire was a civilization of contrasts. On one hand, it built incredible cities, developed sophisticated governance, and contributed immensely to art, philosophy, and law. On the other hand, it was a society that thrived on bloodshed and cruelty, using torture as a means of control, punishment, and entertainment. The methods of torture used by the Romans were some of the most horrific in human history, designed not just to kill, but to inflict prolonged and unimaginable suffering. While modern societies have largely abandoned such barbaric practices, the legacy of Rome's brutality serves as a dark reminder of the depths to which human cruelty can descend.